My dad raised his glass and laughed loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You are just the family mistake." My stepmother giggled, my sister smirked, and I sat frozen, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. The table erupted in whispers and stifled laughter. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but before I could even move, a man's chair scraped against the marble. He stood calm and deliberate, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "That's my daughter." The room fell silent. My dad's face was drained of color. My stepmother's smile froze mid-laugh, and in that frozen moment, I knew nothing about my life would ever be the same again. Hours earlier that same evening, the Windsor room at the Marlowe Hotel glowed with chandeliers and polished silver, the kind of holiday scene strangers envy on Instagram. I had slipped into my seat, trying to stay invisible while my dad performed for his guests. Vivienne adjusted the pearls at her throat. Eden scrolled her phone. The waiter moved like clockwork, refilling glasses. The air was heavy with roasted beef and spiced wine, but beneath it I felt the tension building, the sense that tonight something would break. I didn't yet know the words that would shatter the room, only that every smile around me felt too sharp to be real. For a second I thought I had misheard him. The room froze, the air itself stopping to listen. Vivienne covered her mouth with a soft giggle that sounded rehearsed. Eden looked up from her phone and smirked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "Dad's right, you are pathetic." I felt every pair of eyes at the table turn toward me. I could smell the roasted beef, the sharp tang of wine, the sweetness of cranberry glaze, everything vivid, almost too real. My hands went cold against the napkin in my lap. I wanted to stand to scream, but something heavier held me still. Then, from the far end of the table, a chair scraped against the marble floor. A man's voice, low and steady, cut through the silence. "That's my daughter." The words fell like thunder in a room that suddenly forgot how to breathe. My dad's smile faltered. Vivienne's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Even the waiter froze, unsure whether to move or disappear. That moment is burned into me like a brand. The way my dad's face drained of color, the way the room shifted from laughter to confusion, the way I felt the ground tilt beneath me. He was my dad's boss, Laurent Mercer, and until that night I had no idea who he really was. After he spoke, no one said a word for what felt like an eternity. The music from the corner band kept playing oblivious. The soft notes of a saxophone filled the silence like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Gerald Kane, my dad, cleared his throat and forced a laugh that sounded too high, too brittle. "That's absurd, Laurent. What kind of joke is this, Mr.?" Mercer's gaze never left mine. I could see the lines around his eyes, the steadiness of someone who had lived long enough to stop fearing consequences. "It's no joke, Gerald. I recognize her." Vivienne placed her hand on my dad's arm. "Gerald, please, let's not make a scene." But the scene had already been made. I pushed my chair back slowly. My knees brushed the tablecloth. Every nerve in my body screamed to move to escape the weight of their stares. I stood and straightened my coat. I didn't look at anyone. I just said I'm leaving. No one stopped me. Not my dad, not Vivienne, not even Eden, who was too busy pretending to text to avoid looking at me. The hotel lobby felt too bright as I stepped out. The gold garlands and red ribbons glittered like they belonged to another world, one I'd never be part of. Outside, the cold hit my face like a slap. Snowflakes drifted against the windows, melting as they touched the glass. I walked toward the revolving door, but a voice called after me. "Rayon." I turned. Laurent Mercer stood there, coat in hand, his expression unreadable. The man who had just detonated my life like it was a headline. "Wait," he said. "Please." I hesitated, then nodded. We stood near the entrance, where the sound of laughter from the other rooms seemed to fade into the distance. He spoke first, his tone quiet but certain. "I'm sorry you had to hear it like that, but it was time. Time for what I asked," my voice shaking. Time for truth. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he pressed a card into my hand. "Call me when you're ready." I stared at the card, my name already printed on it beneath his company's logo. It didn't make sense, none of it did. I walked out into the night, my heels sinking into the snow. The lights of downtown Chicago shimmered through the flurries. I kept walking until the hotel disappeared behind me. That night I didn't go home. I walked along Michigan Avenue until my toes went numb, and my breath turned into clouds. I replayed the scene over and over, my dad's laughter, the way Vivienne smiled, the way Eden joined in like it was a game. But mostly I remembered the weight of those last words. "That's my daughter." By the time I reached the bridge over the Chicago River, the city had gone quiet. The only sound was the distant echo of a taxi horn and the slow rush of water below. I leaned on the railing, feeling the metal burn cold against my palms. My reflection in the dark water looked like a stranger. I thought about my mama Lara and how she used to tell me that truth always finds its way through. Maybe this was what she meant, but the truth didn't feel like light tonight. It felt like a wound reopening. I didn't know how long I stood there, but when I finally turned back toward home, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It read, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I walked home through the snow, each step heavier than the last. The next morning, the city woke up as if nothing had happened. The world kept moving indifferent. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee, my hands still trembling. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. When I checked my phone again, there were missed calls from my dad's assistant and a message from Eden that simply said, "You embarrassed us." I deleted it without replying. By noon, the story had already spread. My dad's dinner had been the talk of half his company. Word traveled fast in that world of glass towers and egos. I imagined Vivian smoothing over the chaos, turning my humiliation into gossip they could laugh about later. But I knew something had shifted. Late that afternoon, I found the courage to visit my mom's bakery in Lakeview. The place smelled of cinnamon and butter, the kind of warmth that makes you forget the world outside. My mom looked up from behind the counter, surprise flickering across her face. "Rayan, honey, are you all right?" I nodded, though my throat was tight. I sat at one of the small tables by the window. She poured me coffee without asking. "It happened again," I said finally. Her hands stilled. She knew what I meant. "He humiliated you, in front of everyone." Her shoulders sagged. She set the pot down gently. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Some people never learn mercy." There was something about her tone that made me stop. Like she wasn't just talking about him. "Mom," I said quietly, "last night one of his guests stood up for me. Laurent Mercier." Her face went pale. The name meant something to her. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "Who is he?" She looked down at her hands covered in flour, trembling slightly. "Someone I knew a long time ago." The bell above the door rang as a customer entered, giving her a moment to collect herself. I waited, but she didn't say more. When the shop emptied again, she wiped the counter, her eyes avoiding mine. "You don't need to know everything tonight," she said softly. But I already knew that wasn't true. That evening as I walked home, snow fell heavier, covering the sidewalks in a thin white blanket. The city lights glowed through it, blurred and soft. I tried to convince myself that what happened at the dinner didn't matter. That humiliation was temporary, but something had changed inside me. When I reached my building, I pulled out Laurent Mercier's card. The embossed letters caught the light. I turned it over in my hand until my fingers went numb. I didn't call him. Not yet. Instead, I sat by the window and watched the snow build on the ledge. Across the street, a couple walked hand in hand. Their laughter carried faintly through the wind. I thought about all the times I had been the outsider. The family gatherings where my chair felt smaller, my voice quieter. The moments when my dad's approval hung just out of reach. I had spent years pretending indifference, but now the mask had cracked. For the first time, I wasn't sure who I was angrier at. Him for the cruelty or myself for expecting anything different. Hours later, as the city slept, I finally took the card and placed it beside my phone. My decision could wait until morning, but deep down, I already knew I would call, because whatever truth Laurent Mercier carried, it had already begun to pull me toward it, and the part of me that had stayed silent for years was done being quiet. The morning light sliced through my blinds like it didn't care that my world had cracked open the night before. My head still throbbed with the echo of my dad's laughter. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling that same helpless pressure building in my chest. I'd spent most of the night replaying it, every sound, every word. The laughter, the silence that followed, and that strange voice that claimed me as his daughter. It should have felt like a lie. It didn't. It felt like something I had been waiting to hear without knowing it. I made coffee but barely tasted it. The mug trembled slightly in my hand. Outside Chicago looked almost gentle, the snow softening the noise. But I felt raw. I wanted to crawl out of my skin, to be anyone but the woman humiliated in front of her dad's dinner guests. I hadn't heard from him, not a call, not a message. Vivian's silence was just as predictable. Eden had posted something on social media about family loyalty. It was a photo from that same dinner. She'd cropped me out. By noon, I couldn't sit still. I walked to the river, pulling my coat tight. The wind stung my cheeks. I watched the current move under a thin layer of ice and tried to imagine what my life might look like without them. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me said the answer. Rayan, said the voice on the other end. It was Laurent Mercier. I froze, my breath catching. He sounded calm, older, the kind of steady tone that didn't waver even when the world did. "I know this is strange," he said, "but I would like to speak to you. Privately, if you're willing." I hesitated. Why me? Why now? Why at all? But before I could talk myself out of it, I said yes. We met at a small cafe near Kinsey and Dearborn. The air smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I got there early and sat near the window, my reflection flickering between snowflakes. When he arrived, people looked up. He had that kind of presence, tall, composed, not showy but commanding in quiet ways. He greeted me like someone who already knew me. "Rayan, thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure what to do with my hands. "You dropped a grenade into my life last night," I said finally. He smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "I know. I am sorry for the way it happened, but I could not stay silent any longer." "What do you mean?" He reached into his coat pocket and took out a folded photograph. He slid it across the table. It was old edges frayed. A woman smiled in the picture, her hair caught by sunlight, standing beside a younger version of him. My mom. I felt the air leave my lungs. "I met Alara when she worked at the hospital," he said softly. "We were together for a short time. I had to leave for business overseas. When I came back, she was gone. I searched for her. She never told me she was pregnant." I stared at the photo again, my mom's laughter frozen in a moment before everything went wrong. "She never told me about you," I said. He nodded. "I can imagine why." Silence settled between us. He looked tired, like a man carrying too many unfinished sentences. "You didn't have to say it last night?" I said quietly. He met my gaze. "I did." "He humiliated you." I could not sit there and pretend not to see it. I looked down at my coffee, watching the swirl of cream dissolve. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking for anything, Rayan. Not forgiveness, not family. I just want you to know the truth." "Truth," I repeated softly. That word had burned me before. He gave a faint smile. "The truth doesn't heal right away. Sometimes it hurts first." After he left, I sat there until my coffee went cold. I kept staring at that photograph. My mom looked so free, so unlike the careful woman who raised me. I wondered how much of her life had been spent hiding. That night I called her. She sounded tired, the clinking of dishes in the background. "Mom," I said, "do you know a man named Laurent Mercer?" There was silence. Then the smallest exhale. "Rayan. Where did you hear that name?" "He was at dinner. He said he knew you." Her voice broke slightly. "Oh, sweetheart. It was true, wasn't it?" She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Yes, it was a long time ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your dad made it clear he would destroy both of us if I did. He made me choose peace or war. I chose peace." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's not peace, Mom. That's surrender." "Maybe," she said, "but it kept you safe." I wanted to argue, but my throat closed up. We were quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He isn't a bad man, Rayan. He's the one who got away." Her voice cracked at the end, and that broke something in me. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. The city lights glowed against the snow, and I kept thinking about all the versions of my life that might have been. The next morning, I woke up with the photograph still on my nightstand. I took it to work with me, sliding it into my notebook. At Mercer Axiom, no one mentioned the dinner. My boss Clarice acted like everything was normal. She gave me a new set of audit files to review, and I was grateful for the distraction. But when I opened this folder, my heart stopped. Cane Harbor Ventures. My dad's company. It wasn't assigned to me by accident. The system had rerouted it under my clearance level. I could have sent it back, but something in me hesitated. I clicked open the first report. The numbers didn't make sense. Transfers between shell accounts, fake charities tied to Vivienne's foundation, donor lists that didn't match bank entries. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. At lunch, Clarice stopped by my desk. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Just reviewing." She nodded. "Take your time." When she left, I leaned back and stared at the data. My dad had built an empire on deceit. I thought about karma, about the way truth waits for its moment. Maybe this was mine. That evening, I stayed late. The office emptied, lights dimmed. I saved copies of the files to a secure drive. My fingers trembled as I typed the encryption key. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it. I just knew I needed it safe. Outside, the wind howled through the streets. Chicago in winter doesn't forgive weakness. I walked home, snow crunching beneath my boots, and every step felt heavier with the weight of what I now carried. When I reached my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. My reflection stared back, pale and tired. I could hear my dad's voice again, that laugh, those words. The family mistake. Maybe he was right in one way. Mistakes have a way of changing things. Days passed, and the files kept pulling me in. Each document revealed more rot beneath the surface. I started cross-referencing donations and found a string of transfers connected to an event Vivienne hosted 2 years ago. Money meant for cancer research had vanished into a private account offshore. One evening I stayed so late that Laurent stopped by. He didn't look surprised to find me there. Working after hours, he said. I shrugged. Some things don't sleep. He studied me quietly, then said, I see you found something. I froze. I didn't look at your screen, he said, but I know that expression. I've seen it before on auditors who stumble into the truth. I swallowed hard. What would you do if you found out your family was corrupt? He thought for a moment. I'd ask whether they were worth protecting. The question hit harder than I expected. He started to leave but paused by the door. Rayan, sometimes silence is a form of power. Just remember who you are keeping it for. After he left, I sat there staring at the empty hallway. The hum of the lights felt louder than before. That weekend I visited my mom again. She was rolling dough in the bakery kitchen, her hands dusted in flour. The smell of vanilla filled the air. You look tired, she said. Just work, I replied. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. Mom, what would you do if someone hurt you and didn't even realize they had? She sighed. I would decide if their ignorance was worth my energy. And if they were family. Her hands stopped moving. Then I'd remember that blood doesn't excuse cruelty. I nodded slowly. I think I understand. She smiled faintly. You always do eventually. Later, as I drove back through downtown, I passed my dad's office tower. The lights on the top floors still burned defiant against the dark. I wondered if he even knew what was coming. When I got home, I opened my laptop. The files waited silent and patient. I began organizing them, labeling evidence and connecting threads. Every click felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I had a folder labeled The Kane Project. I stared at it, my chest tight. I didn't know if I was ready to expose him yet, but I knew I couldn't unsee what I had found. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city glowed faintly in the pale light. Somewhere in that vast skyline, my dad was waking up to another morning believing he was untouchable. I whispered to myself, maybe not for long. The first time I saw my dad after that dinner, he didn't look like a man haunted by what he'd done. He looked like someone trying to erase a scene he couldn't control. He came to my office building 2 weeks later unannounced, wearing his usual polished suit and that familiar performative calm. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom, tight and uncertain. Mr. Kane is here to see you. I felt my stomach twist. I almost told her to say I was busy, but curiosity won. Let him up, I said. When he stepped out of the elevator, I saw the faint shadow of sleepless nights under his eyes, though he'd done his best to hide it. Rayan, he said. Like he was greeting a stranger he was pretending to know. I motioned toward the small conference room beside my desk. He followed his cologne, arriving a second before him, too strong and familiar. He didn't sit right away. He looked around, scanning the office, probably trying to gauge what kind of position I held here. When he finally took the seat, he smiled, that rehearsed, shallow smile I had known since childhood. I thought we should clear the air, he began. I waited silent. He folded his hands. That night got out of hand. People talk. We should both be careful about how it's remembered. I stared at him, trying to process the absurdity of it. Careful about how it is remembered, as if it were a rumor, not my life. You called me a mistake, I said, loud enough for your entire board to hear. He shifted, his jaw tightening. I was drinking. It was a joke that landed wrong. It landed exactly as you meant it, I said. He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind the arrogance. You embarrassed me, Rayan. Do you know how that looked? With Mercer standing there claiming to be your dad. Do you know what that could cost me? I laughed quietly, a sound that surprised even me. That's what this is about. Not what you said, not what you did. Just how it looks. He leaned forward, voice low. You need to stay away from Laurent Mercer. That man will use you to get to me. I wanted to ask if he had ever considered that maybe Laurent wasn't the one using anyone. Instead, I said, he didn't humiliate me, Dad. You did. The word dad tasted strange on my tongue, something between habit and grief. He stood suddenly, smoothing his jacket. You've always been dramatic, like your mom. The air thickened between us. My mom had been his favorite weapon when he ran out of defenses. You can go now, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. I don't know what Mercer told you, but he's not who you think he is. Then he left. After he was gone, I sat there shaking. The sunlight caught on the glass walls, and for a second, I saw my reflection staring back, tired, pale, but steady. He still saw me as that scared girl sitting at the end of the table, waiting for permission to exist. He didn't realize that version of me had died the moment Laurent said the words that night. Later that day, Clarice came by my desk. You all right? She asked. I nodded. My dad stopped by. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. The one from Kane Harbor, the very one. She hesitated, then said, "Be careful. People like him don't visit without a reason." I smiled faintly. I know. That evening I met Laurent again, this time by the Riverwalk. It was colder than usual, the air biting through my gloves. He stood looking out at the water, his breath visible in small clouds. When he turned, I saw that same quiet steadiness in his eyes. "He came to see you, didn't he?" he asked. "Yes." "And what did he want?" "Control," I said simply. He nodded, unsurprised. That has always been his currency. We walked along the water in silence for a while. The city lights reflected in the river, rippling and broken. I told him what my dad had said, how he warned me against him. Laurent smiled slightly, not with amusement, but something closer to pity. "Your dad fears exposure, Rayan, not just the financial kind. The personal kind." "What do you mean?" He stopped walking. "There are people who build empires out of lies and convince themselves they are the truth. The moment someone sees through them, they crumble. Gerald was always good at building illusions. You knew him well." "Too well," he said. "He used to work for me when he was younger. Ambitious, reckless, always wanting more. When I refused to fund one of his ventures, he left and started Cane Harbor with my contacts, and stole Mom in the process, I thought, but didn't say." He looked at me, his expression softening. "I can help you, but only if you want it. This isn't about revenge for me anymore, it's about the truth." I looked at the dark water again. "I don't know what I want yet." "That's all right," he said. "Just promise me you won't let him define you anymore." His words followed me home. That night I dreamed of my mom again. She was younger, standing in sunlight holding a camera. She smiled and said, "One day you'll see yourself clearly, and it won't scare you." When I woke up, my phone buzzed with a new message. From Eden. "We need to talk." I hesitated before replying. "About what?" "Please. Coffee tomorrow morning." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next day, we met at a cafe near Michigan Avenue. She was already there, dressed too perfectly for morning, sunglasses perched in her hair. When she saw me, her face brightened with practiced warmth. "Rayan, thanks for coming." I sat across from her. "You said you wanted to talk." She stirred her drink, avoiding my eyes. "Look, I know things have been tense. Dad's a mess. Vivian's trying to hold everything together. And I didn't mean to laugh that night. It just happened." "You didn't mean to." She winced. "I was nervous. Everyone was watching. I didn't know what else to do." Her voice trembled slightly, and for a brief second, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to peek into my room when she thought no one was watching. "You don't owe me an apology for him," I said. "I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it because I was cruel. I didn't know what to say." The apology was unexpected, fragile, but real. She took a deep breath. "He's been acting strange lately. He's paranoid, angry all the time. I heard him yelling at Vivian about some files. He said someone's digging into his accounts. Do you know anything about that?" My heart skipped. I kept my face still. "No. Why would I?" She frowned, studying me. "I don't know. You always had a way of knowing things you weren't supposed to." I forced a small laugh. "Childhood habits die hard." She smiled faintly. "For what it's worth, I miss when things were easier." "They were never easy, Eden. You just didn't see it." Her eyes glistened slightly, then she nodded. "Maybe you're right." After she left, I sat there for a while. The city moved outside, cars honking, people rushing, life pretending to be normal. But inside, everything in me was shifting. That night, I went back over the files again. Every line of code, every transaction. The deeper I went, the more I saw Vivian's fingerprints. She was as guilty as my dad. Charity events, donations, everything tied neatly to a network of shell companies. It was greed dressed as generosity. Around midnight, Clarice called. "Still at the office?" "Yeah," I said. "Can't sleep." I heard her smile through the line. "You sound like me 20 years ago." "Just remember, no job is worth losing yourself over." "I'm not losing myself," I said quietly. "I'm finding out who I really am." She paused, then said, "That's usually the dangerous part." After we hung up, I stared at the city again. The snow had stopped leaving the streets, slick and glimmering. Somewhere out there, my dad was trying to keep his empire from cracking. By the weekend, I had gathered enough evidence to see the full scope of their fraud. But exposing them would mean exposing myself too. I would become the daughter who took down her dad. The headlines would write themselves. I called my mom on Sunday morning. She answered with the sound of the bakery behind her customers chatting. "You sound heavy," she said. I laughed softly. "That's one word for it." She lowered her voice. "You found something, didn't you?" "Yes, too much." "Then you know what you have to do. It's not that simple." "It never is," she said. "But silence protects the wrong people." I closed my eyes. I knew she was right. That night, I printed the most incriminating documents and stored them in a folder. I didn't know what step would come next, but I knew it was close. As I locked the drawer, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Careful who you trust." I stared at it until the words blurred. I didn't know if it was a threat or a warning, but either way, it confirmed one thing. Someone knew what I was doing. The message appeared again the next morning. "Careful who you trust." Same word, same number, no name. I stared at it over my coffee, my mind running through possibilities. Maybe my dad knew. Maybe someone at work had seen me pull the files. Or maybe it was a warning from someone who didn't want me to stop. The thought made my pulse quicken. I deleted the message, then immediately regretted it. Fear and curiosity are cousins. You never know which one you're feeding until it's too late. By the time I got to the office, the winter sky had turned a dull gray. The city felt heavier somehow, like it knew I was carrying something dangerous. Clarice was in a meeting, so I slipped into my office quietly and powered up my computer. I checked the logs. No sign of unauthorized access. Still, something felt off. Around 10, my dad called. I didn't answer. Then came the voicemail. "Ryan, we need to talk. Don't make this worse than it already is." His voice was clipped calm, but I could hear the edge beneath it, the tone of a man who realized he wasn't untouchable anymore. I ignored it and turned back to the audit. The data had started to tell a clearer story now. The fake charity events were just one part of it. There were consulting fees paid to non-existent firms, invoices for services never rendered, and accounts tied to offshore holdings under false names. And at the center of all of it sat my dad's signature. By lunch, my stomach was twisted in knots. I left the office and walked toward the river again. The air was biting sharp against my lungs. Laurent called while I was standing by the water. I answered. "You got a message, didn't you?" he said. I hesitated. "How do you know that?" "Because I got one too. The same words." My heart pounded. What does that mean? It means someone is getting nervous. Whoever sent it doesn't want you digging deeper. Do you think it's my dad, possibly? But I doubt he's the one pressing the keys. We met that evening in a quiet bar tucked into the corner of an old brick building on State Street. The place smelled like whiskey and oak, the lighting dim enough to make secrets feel safe. Laurent was already there, his coat draped neatly over the back of his chair. He greeted me with a small nod, as if we were co-conspirators rather than strangers tied by blood and circumstance. I told him everything, from the message to the files to Eden's warnings about our dad's paranoia. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm but intent. He finally said, "There's something you should know. Gerald didn't just build Cane Harbor on stolen contacts. He built it on stolen money?" I frowned. "What do you mean, before Cane Harbor existed?" "He was supposed to manage one of my trust accounts. It was meant for long-term investments, nothing extraordinary. But when I looked back years later, a large portion was gone, vanished. And you think he used it to start his company? I know he did. But proving it has never been easy." I leaned forward. "What if I told you I could prove it now?" His eyes sharpened slightly. "Then we'd have what we need." The word carried weight. He took a slow sip of his drink. "This isn't about revenge anymore, Rayon. It's about reclaiming what was taken from both of us." But it felt like revenge. It pulsed in my veins, hot and alive. When I got home that night, the wind was howling outside, snow slanting against the windows. I turned on my laptop again, the glow filling the room. I began pulling more threads, tracing transactions through subsidiaries, connecting names to aliases, and there it was. A series of transfers labeled consulting fees from Mercer Holdings, Laurent's own company. But they hadn't come from him. They were forged, rerouted through Cane Harbor's ledgers years ago. I called Laurent immediately. "It's worse than we thought," I said. "He didn't just steal from you. He made it look like you were part of it." Silence on the line. Then low and steady, Laurent said, "That's why he's panicking. If this comes out, it doesn't just ruin him, it clears my name." The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they made was ugly. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face at that dinner table, laughing like a man who believed he'd already won. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my apartment door. No name, just my initials in black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." My hands shook. Whoever it was, they were close enough to know where I lived. I called the police, filed a report, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Without proof, it was just another anonymous threat in a city full of them. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I packed an overnight bag and drove to my mom's house. She was in the bakery when I arrived, humming softly as she worked. Her face softened when she saw me. "You look exhausted," she said. I handed her the note. "Someone left this for me." Her smile faded. She read it slowly, her lips tightening. "You think your dad sent this? I don't know. But someone wants to scare me scared." She took my hand. "Then don't give them what they want." Her faith in me was unshakable, but mine was running thin. That night I stayed in my old room. Everything looked smaller, quieter. I lay awake listening to the sound of snow hitting the window pane. Around midnight, I heard a car outside. The engine idled for a few seconds, then drove off. I peeked through the blinds. Tire tracks in the snow led straight past the house. My heart pounded until I heard my mom snore softly down the hall. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. The next morning, Laurent called again. His voice was tense. "You need to get out of town for a few days." "Why?" "Because I think your dad knows you have the files." "How someone from your office called him." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Who, I don't know." "But you can't go back there, not yet." I packed my things and checked into a small motel an hour outside the city. The kind of place that didn't ask for ID if you paid cash. The wallpaper was peeling, the heater rattled, and the only light came from a flickering lamp. It was perfect. For the next 2 days, I worked from my laptop, cataloging every document, creating backups, encrypting them, and sending copies to cloud drives under new aliases. If anyone came for me, they wouldn't be able to erase what I knew. On the third night, there was a knock at the door. My chest tightened. I approached slowly, peering through the peephole. Laurent. Relief washed through me as I opened the door. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. "You look terrible," he said gently. I almost laughed. "I've been better." He poured 2 cups of the weak motel coffee and sat across from me. He looked tired too, lines deeper around his eyes. He said there's going to be a board meeting at Cane Harbor next week. It's unannounced. He's gathering the directors, trying to get ahead of whatever's coming. "And you want me there?" "No," he said. "I want you ready. We're going to leak the files that morning." I stared at him. Leak them to the SEC, the media, and the board itself simultaneously. He'll have no time to cover his tracks. I hesitated. "Once we do that, there's no going back. There never was," he said. That night after he left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every insult, every humiliation, every quiet moment of being made small. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel this heavy, but it did. It pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. The next morning, I drove back into the city before sunrise. I parked near the river again and watched the first light break through the fog. Somewhere in those glass towers, my dad was preparing his next move, and I was preparing mine. When I got to my apartment, the door was ajar. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stepped inside slowly. Drawers open, papers scattered, laptop gone. Panic surged through me. They had been here. I called Laurent. It went straight to voicemail. I ran to my closet, pulled out the spare drive I'd hidden behind the false panel. Still there. I exhaled shakily. Whoever broke in didn't find the real evidence. By afternoon, I was back at the office. People looked at me oddly, whispers trailing in my wake. Clarice called me into her office. She shut the door and lowered her voice. "What are you involved in, Rayan?" I blinked. "What do you mean your dad's lawyer called this morning? He said you've been accessing confidential data." My throat went dry. Clarice's tone softened. "I don't know what's going on between you two, but if this comes down on you, the company won't protect you." I nodded slowly. "I understand." After she dismissed me, I walked straight to the server room and logged into my private account. Every copy of the files was still intact. They hadn't reached that far yet. That night, I met Laurent one last time before the storm. We sat in his car parked near the edge of the city, the skyline glowing faintly in the distance. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I will be." He nodded. "Sometimes justice looks a lot like destruction." I looked out at the horizon. Then, let it burn. The morning of the board meeting began with rain. Not the gentle kind, but the cold, punishing kind that made the city look metallic. I sat by the window of my apartment, watching drops race each other down the glass. Today was the day everything would break. The evidence was ready, the servers were primed, and the truth waited like thunder behind the clouds. I should have been nervous, but instead I felt hollow, like I'd been emptied out to make room for what was coming. Laurent called just after 7. His voice was steady. "It's time. The files go live at 9. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said. There was a pause, then he said softly, "Once it starts, there's no taking it back, I know." I ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. My hair pulled back dark circles under my eyes, but something fierce had taken root behind them. At 8:30, I left the apartment and walked to the subway. The city moved around me like nothing unusual was happening. People rushing to work, umbrellas opening like dark flowers. I felt invisible among them, a secret ticking bomb. When I reached the office, Clarice was already pacing near the elevators. She stopped when she saw me. "You look pale," she said. "Just a rough night," I replied. She gave a sympathetic nod. "Whatever's going on with your dad, I hope it ends soon." It will, I said quietly, one way or another. At 9 o'clock sharp, I pressed send. The files launched through a secure server, reaching 3 destinations at once: the SEC, the Chicago Tribune, and the Cane Harbor Board of Directors. My pulse thudded in my ears as I watched the progress bar complete. There was no going back now. Within minutes, my inbox flooded with alerts. Messages, calls, notifications. The city that had once ignored me was suddenly awake. I shut my laptop, grabbed my coat, and left the building before the wave could hit. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. I ducked into a coffee shop, my hands trembling as I ordered. The TV behind the counter was tuned to a local news channel. The headline rolled across the bottom of the screen. Corporate scandal erupts at Cane Harbor Ventures. CEO Gerald Cane accused of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. My knees almost buckled. It was real now. The footage cut to reporters standing outside the glass tower that bore his name. Employees rushed out behind them, phones pressed to their ears. The commentator said the SEC had confirmed receiving detailed evidence from an anonymous whistleblower. I didn't have to wonder who they meant. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, from Clarice, from Eden, from my dad. I turned it off. Around noon, Laurent texted me from a new number. He's been escorted out of the building. The board's calling an emergency session. It's happening. I didn't reply. I just sat there staring at the rain sliding down the cafe window, the city spinning faster than I could process. By afternoon, my name was trending online. Someone from the company must have leaked it. Whistleblower identified as Rayan Kane, daughter of accused CEO. Betrayal or justice, the headlines asked. My stomach turned as I read the comments. Some praised me for bravery. Others called me a snake. I shut my phone again and went home. The building lobby was quiet, the air thick with that sterile scent of polished marble. As I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a man waiting near my door. My dad. He looked older, smaller somehow. His hair was damp, his tie loosened, the confident posture gone. When he saw me, his face hardened. "You did this," he said. I said nothing. "Everything I built, everything this family had, and you burned it down. You built it on lies." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You think this is justice? You've destroyed your name too. You'll never get a job in this city again." Maybe. But at least I can sleep. He stared at me for a long time, shaking his head. "You're just like your mom. Weak, sentimental, always thinking truth is enough to save you." My jaw clenched. The mention of her felt like a blade. I said quietly, "Truth isn't supposed to save you. It's supposed to free you." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, fear, regret, I couldn't tell. Then he turned and walked away, leaving muddy footprints on the carpet. I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it, until my breathing slowed. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by something heavier. Emptiness. That night, the news spiraled. More reports surfaced. Emails, transaction records, offshore accounts. Vivian's name appeared too. The press called it one of the biggest financial scandals in Chicago in a past decade. Around midnight, I got a message from Eden. "You could have warned me." I stared at it for a long time before typing back. I tried to save what mattered. She didn't respond. The next morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. It was the police. They had questions. I let them in, my hands steady even as my pulse raced. They asked about the documents, how I got them, who else had access. I told the truth. I didn't mention Laurent. After they left, I called my mom. She had already seen the news. Her voice trembled. "It's over, isn't it? I don't know," I said. She was quiet for a while. "I'm proud of you, Rayan." Tears stung my eyes. For the first time in years, those words didn't feel like a lie. Later that day, I went for a walk. The sky had cleared, patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. People passed by, unaware that my family's name was plastered across every paper in town. I felt both invisible and exposed. At the river, I stopped. The water glimmered faintly, carrying fragments of ice downstream. I thought about all the choices that had brought me here, about the girl who used to think love could fix anything. About the woman who learned that sometimes you have to break something to make it whole. When I turned back toward the street, a car was parked by the curb. Laurent stepped out, his coat collar turned up against the cold. "You did it," he said. "We did it," I corrected. He smiled faintly. "The board reinstated my position. They're offering settlements to the investors. It's going to take time, but the company can be rebuilt." "Good," I said. He studied me. "You don't sound happy. I don't know what I am." He nodded. "That's normal. Justice rarely feels like joy." We stood there for a moment watching the river. He said quietly, "He won't recover from this, you know. Men like him don't know how to live without control. I know. And you, what will you do now?" "I don't know yet. Maybe start over." Maybe disappear for a while. If you need help, you know where to find me. I smiled slightly. I think I need to find myself first. That night, I sat by the window again, the city glowing faintly in the dark. The storm had passed, but something in me was still unsettled. I poured a glass of wine and turned on the news. They showed footage of my dad being escorted into a car by federal agents. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. The anchor's voice said he faced decades in prison if convicted. I turned off the TV and sat in silence. It wasn't a victory I felt. It was something quieter, something closer to peace. Before bed, I wrote a single line in my journal. Sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to let it bleed. The day after my dad's arrest, the world moved slower, as if even the city itself was unsure what to do with the truth. The news replayed the same footage over and over, his hands behind his back, his face blank, his suit wrinkled. They called him disgraced, fallen, the symbol of corporate greed. But for me, it wasn't a headline. It was an echo of everything I had lived through, every quiet humiliation, every time I was made to feel like a burden. Justice didn't look like satisfaction. It looked like silence. The first call that morning came from Eden. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear her voice. She sounded small, her tone stripped of its usual sharpness. "They took him this morning," she said. "I know. You did this." There was no accusation in her words, just confusion. "You destroyed him." I took a breath. "He destroyed himself, Eden." She was quiet. "You could have let it go." "Could I?" I asked softly. "Could you live, pretending it never happened?" She didn't respond, only said, "Vivienne won't stop blaming you." I hung up before she could say more. My hands shook afterward, though I didn't know if it was anger or sorrow. Later that morning, reporters started gathering outside my apartment building. I could see them from my window cameras pointed upward, waiting for a statement. I didn't give them one. I drew the curtains and sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. My phone buzzed again and again until I finally turned it off. By evening, the crowd had thinned, replaced by the quiet hum of traffic. I poured myself a drink and stared at the skyline. Chicago looked beautiful from afar, distant enough that you could forget what was broken inside it. That's when Laurent called. "You should leave the city for a while," he said. "Things will get messy before they settle." "Messy?" I asked. "It already is." He sighed. "You've done what most people wouldn't have had the courage to do. But courage has a cost." I smiled faintly. "I'm learning that." He hesitated, then said, "There's something else. Vivienne is trying to pin the entire fraud on you. She's claiming you tampered with the files to protect me." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she is." "It won't stick," he added quickly. "The evidence is solid. But you need to be careful." "I'll handle it," I said. After the call, I sat for a long time in the dark. I thought of Vivienne, her pearls, her smile, her soft voice hiding the venom beneath. She had always treated me like an inconvenience she couldn't get rid of. Now I was the enemy. 2 days later, a subpoena arrived at my door. I was officially under investigation as a potential co-conspirator. My stomach dropped when I read it. Even though I knew it was a tactic, the words still felt like a blow. That evening, I met Laurent in his office. It was quieter there, the city lights stretching out below the glass windows. He looked tired, his suit rumpled, his expression grim. "They're desperate," he said. "They think if they can discredit you, they can save what's left of themselves. Will it work? Not if we stay ahead of them." He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of communications between Vivienne and several board members. They were planning to testify that I had manipulated the data. I flipped through the papers, my pulse quickening. "She's really doing this." He nodded. "She's cornered. People like her don't surrender. They destroy whatever threatens them." I looked up at him. "What do we do?" "We let her speak," he said calmly. "Then we show them the truth she forgot to erase." The next week felt like a blur of lawyers' meetings and sleepless nights. My name was dragged through the headlines, each story twisting the facts in a new way. "Whistleblower or traitor?" the headlines asked again. My mom stopped watching the news altogether. She just baked quietly, her hands moving with mechanical grace. On the day of the hearing, I wore a plain black dress and pulled my hair back. I wanted to disappear. The federal building was cold, the walls lined with echoes of footsteps and whispered gossip. Vivienne arrived with her lawyer wearing a gray suit and her usual pearls. She gave me a look that was almost maternal, as if she pitied me. When it was her turn to speak, she played her part perfectly. Calm, poised, sorrowful. She told them I had been unstable for years, resentful, that I'd stolen files from the company to ruin my dad's reputation after being cut off financially. She even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue when she spoke about how much pain I'd caused. I listened without flinching. When my turn came, I stood and looked around the room. I told them the truth. how I'd found the evidence, how the accounts led directly to Vivian's charity, how my dad's name was signed on every fraudulent transfer. I spoke slowly, clearly, my hands trembling only once. Then Laurent's attorney stepped forward and submitted the documents we'd prepared. They showed that Vivian had personally approved several of the offshore accounts. Her signature was there, her emails too. The silence in the room was thick as the panel reviewed the pages. Vivian's mask cracked for the first time. Her face drained of color, her lips parting in disbelief. Afterward, outside the building, reporters swarmed us. I kept my head down while Laurent guided me through the crowd. We got into his car, the flash of cameras still burning behind us. "You did well," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel like victory. It rarely does." When I got home that night, I opened the window and let the cold air in. The city smelled like wet pavement and exhaust, like something still alive beneath the chaos. I sat on the floor again, looking out, wondering what came next. The following week, Vivian was charged. She had hidden assets offshore separate from my dad's accounts. Eden called me again, her voice shaking. "You're happy now, aren't you? You got what you wanted?" I closed my eyes. "I never wanted this, Eden." "Then what did you want? For the truth to mean something?" She started to cry softly. "I lost everything." "No," I said gently. "You lost the illusion. That's different." She hung up. For days afterward, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my family, all the lies unraveling, the empire turning to dust. Sometimes revenge isn't about rage. It's about exhaustion. Laurent visited again, this time at my mom's bakery. He looked oddly out of place among the smell of sugar and flour, but Mom greeted him kindly. She poured us coffee and left us to talk. He said the board has reinstated full control to me. "The SEC's closing their case against you. You're in the clear." I nodded. "Thank you." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me. You did this." I looked down at my coffee. "Maybe, but it doesn't feel like winning." He studied with me for a long time. "That's because real justice never feels like winning. It feels like a loss." We sat in silence, the hum of the ovens filling the room. Before he left, he said, "You know your mom loved you deeply. That's what your dad never understood. She didn't lose to him. She chose peace over war. You chose differently, but that doesn't make you wrong." After he was gone, my mom joined me. "You look tired," she said. I smiled weakly. "I'm fine." She shook her head. "You've carried too much for too long. Let it rest now." I wanted to believe her, but I didn't know how. That night, I walked along the river one more time. The air was cold, but the sky was clear. I watched my reflection tremble on the surface of the water. Everything I'd done had started from pain. From that moment at Christmas dinner when my dad called me a mistake. And now, standing there alone, I realized that every choice since had been about proving him wrong. Maybe I finally had. As I turned to go, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You were never the mistake." I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe Laurent, maybe Eden, maybe no one I'd ever know. But I smiled for the first time in weeks. The message stayed on my screen long after I read it. "You were never the mistake." I didn't know who sent it, but I kept staring at it until the words blurred. For the first time in months, something inside me felt lighter. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't closed. It was something quieter, a small shift, like air returning to a room that had been locked too long. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The city was still, the streets wet from night rain. I made coffee and watched the light spread slowly across the skyline. My phone buzzed again, another message. "Can we talk?" It was Eden. I hesitated before replying, yes. She suggested meeting at Lincoln Park near the conservatory. I got there early, walking along the path lined with half-frozen puddles. When she arrived, she looked different, smaller somehow, as if the weight of the last few weeks had finally caught up with her. She hugged herself against the cold. "Thanks for coming," she said. I nodded. "You said you wanted to talk." She looked down. "I don't even know where to start. Everything's falling apart. Vivian's gone. She left yesterday. Took what was left of her jewelry and vanished." I watched her face carefully. "You sound surprised." "I am. She always said she'd never leave Dad. I guess loyalty only lasts until the cameras turn off." I said nothing. Eden sighed. "They froze our accounts. I can't even pay rent right now." "You'll be fine," I said. "You're smart. You'll find your way." She gave a dry laugh. "You sound like Mom." I blinked. "Mom?" She looked embarrassed. "I mean your mom. Sorry. It's all right." She hesitated again, then said quietly, "I wanted to hate you. I tried to. But every time I see another headline, I keep thinking maybe you did what I couldn't." I looked at her closely. "What's that you stopped pretending?" The wind picked up rustling the bare branches overhead. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, "Do you ever wish you hadn't done it every day?" I said. "But wishing doesn't undo the truth." She nodded slowly. "I guess not." We walked for a while, the gravel crunching beneath our shoes. When we reached the fountain, she stopped. "I know I can't fix what happened," she said, "but maybe someday we won't have to hate each other for it." I smiled faintly. Maybe. After she left, I stood by the fountain alone, watching the water ripple in uneven circles. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of her. Just sadness for everything that had been lost before either of us knew how to keep it. That afternoon, I visited my mom. She was arranging pastries in the display case, humming softly. When she saw me, she smiled. "You look better," she said. "I feel lighter." "That's how healing works," she said. "Slow and sneaky." I laughed. "Maybe." She poured us tea and we sat at the small table in the back. She looked at me carefully. I saw the news. "They're saying the charges will stick." "Yes. And Laurent, he's rebuilding." She nodded. "He's always been persistent." I studied her face, the way her eyes softened when she said his name. "You still care about him, don't you?" She smiled sadly. "Some loves don't die, they just grow quiet." I thought about that long after I left the bakery. That evening I went home and opened my laptop. There was a new email waiting for me, subject line legal notice. For a moment my pulse spiked, but when I opened it, I saw it wasn't from the court. It was from the board of Mercer Holdings. They were inviting me to consult on corporate ethics reforms under Laurent's leadership. The irony almost made me laugh. I stared at the email for a long time. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a strange, poetic twist. The daughter of a fraudster helping to rebuild the company he once tried to destroy. I accepted. The first day at Mercer felt surreal. The lobby was filled with glass and quiet efficiency. People nodded politely when I introduced myself, though some recognized my last name and looked uncertain. Laurent greeted me in his office. "Welcome aboard," he said. I smiled. "Still feels odd being on this side of the table. You've earned your place, Rayon. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Over the following weeks, I worked closely with his team. We drafted new transparency policies, restructured internal audits, and created systems that ensured no one could hide the kind of corruption my dad once did. It was exhausting but purposeful. Late one evening as I packed up, Laurent stopped by my desk. "You've done remarkable work," he said. I looked up, smiling faintly. "It feels strange hearing that from you. You're not used to being praised. Not by men who remind me of everything I fought against." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough?" Then he grew serious. "You know, I used to think revenge was about winning, but it's really about reclaiming what was stolen. You've done that." "Maybe," I said, "but it still hurts." He nodded. "Healing usually does." That night as I drove home, I passed by the Marlowe Hotel. Its windows glowed softly in the winter night, the same place where everything began. Without meaning to, I parked and went inside. The Windsor room was empty now, set for some private event. I stood in the doorway looking at the long table, the chandelier gleaming above. It was strange how memory could feel both near and distant, like touching glass. I could still hear the echo of his voice, the laughter, the humiliation. But it didn't cut anymore. It just lingered, then faded. The waiter glanced at me. "Are you looking for someone?" "No," I said. "Just saying goodbye." When I got home, I found another envelope at my door. Inside was a letter written in my dad's handwriting. My chest tightened as I read, "Rayon, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I need you to understand something. I didn't hate you. I hated what you reminded me of. The part of me that couldn't control everything. The part that failed your mom. Maybe exposing me was the only way to save what's left of us." I sat down the letter, trembling in my hands. He ended with a single line. "You were never the mistake." I didn't know if it was sincere or desperate, but I let the tears come. For years I had wanted to hear those words, and now that I had, they hurt more than I expected. The next morning I drove to the prison where he was being held. They allowed me a short visit. When I saw him behind the glass, he looked smaller, older, but his eyes still carried that stubborn pride. He picked up the phone. "You came." I nodded. "I got your letter." He looked down. I meant what I said. I studied him, the man who had shaped so much of my pain. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "You don't have to. Just live better than I did. That I can do." We sat in silence until the guard signaled the end of the visit. He didn't say goodbye. Neither did I. When I walked out, the air was crisp and bright. I stood in the parking lot breathing deeply, and for the first time in a long time, the weight on my chest eased. That evening I went to my mom's bakery again. She was closing up. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her eyes softening. He always had to have the last word, she murmured. Maybe this time it was the right one, I said. She looked at me and smiled. Maybe it was. As I helped her clean up, she said quietly, "You look like yourself again." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe I finally was. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I realized something simple but true. Revenge had been the fire that burned through the lies. But what remained was something I hadn't expected. Space, silence, and a strange kind of peace. The winter ended quietly that year, like a door closing without sound. The city softened under the first light of March, and for the first time in months, I woke up without dread. The world outside my window no longer felt like an accusation. It was just morning. My job at Mercer had become steady, the kind of routine I used to envy in other people's lives. Files, meetings, coffee, silence. But beneath that calm, I could feel something shifting inside me, a slow rebuilding. I was no longer the woman who flinched at my dad's name. I was learning what it meant to exist without him defining me. Still, peace had its own strange weight. There were nights when I'd lie awake, the quiet almost too loud, my mind wandering back to everything that had happened. The investigation, the trial, the letters. I had spent so long living in survival that normal life felt unfamiliar. One evening, Laurent called. He had been traveling, rebuilding the company's reputation one meeting at a time. His voice was warm through the phone. "I have a proposal," he said. "Not business. Something personal." I laughed softly. "That sounds dangerous. Meet me tomorrow." The next day, he took me to a small vineyard outside the city. The air smelled like earth and sunlight, and for a moment I forgot how long it had been since I'd seen anything that wasn't made of glass and steel. We walked between rows of vines still bare from winter, and he told me about a foundation he wanted to start, for whistleblowers, for women who exposed corruption and lost everything. "You should run it," he said. I stared at him. "Me? Why not? You've lived it. You'd know how to help them better than anyone else." The idea stunned me. For so long I had seen myself only as the one who destroyed things. The thought of building something new felt both terrifying and liberating. "I'll think about it," I said. He smiled. "That's all I ask." That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. The foundation, the women it could help, the lives it might rebuild. But part of me was afraid of stepping into the light again. The media had finally moved on from my name. I wasn't sure I wanted to give them another reason to remember me. A week later, I visited my dad again. It was my third visit since his conviction. The guards recognized me now, nodding without expression as they checked my ID. He looked different this time, thinner, quieter. He had been assigned to the prison's workshop program, crafting furniture for charity. It was strange seeing him in gray sanding wood instead of signing deals. "You look better," I said. He smiled faintly. Prison has a way of simplifying things. We sat across from each other, separated by the thick glass. I asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. Then he said, "I saw what you're doing with Mercer. You're keeping up with the news?" "They let us read," he said dryly. "You're doing good work. I'm proud of you." I didn't know how to respond. Pride was a word that had never come without strings before. He continued, "I also know about the foundation Laurent proposed. You should do it." I frowned. "How do you know about that?" He smiled faintly. "Word travels, especially when someone wants to make a difference." I studied him carefully. "You think I can make a difference?" He looked down, his hands folded. "You already have, just not the way either of us expected." I left the prison that day feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not forgiveness, not closure, but acceptance. Like the story between us was finally finished. The following month, I said yes to Laurent. We started the Mercer Truth Initiative in May. At first, it was just a website, a few volunteers, and a small office near the river, but word spread fast. Whistleblowers began reaching out. Women who had been silenced, threatened, or fired for doing the right thing. They told me stories that made my stomach twist, stories that reminded me too much of my own. One woman, Claire, came in one afternoon shaking. She had uncovered fraud at a tech company and had been blacklisted in the industry. She said, "I don't regret telling the truth. I just regret what it cost me." I told her, "That's the price of integrity. It hurts before it heals." We found her a lawyer, a new job, and a second chance. Each case became a small victory, each one a way to rewrite what justice could look like. But even as the foundation grew, there were moments when I caught myself staring out the office window, thinking of my old life, wondering what it would have been like if things had gone differently. Some nights I still dreamed of Christmas dinner, the chandelier, the laughter, the way the room had gone silent when Laurent spoke. In the dream, I wasn't humiliated. I was calm. I looked him in the eye and said, "You're wrong about me. One evening in late June, Laurent and I hosted the Foundation's first benefit gala. It was held at the Marlowe, the same hotel where everything had begun. When I walked into the Windsor room, my chest tightened. The chandeliers gleamed, the tables were dressed in gold and white, the same elegance as before, but this time it belonged to me. Laurent raised a glass. "To truth," he said. "To the courage it takes to speak it." The room applauded. I stood beside him smiling, but inside I felt the weight of every step that had led here. After the applause faded, he leaned toward me. "I never told you how proud I am of you," he said quietly. I looked at him, my throat tight. "Thank you." Later that night, as the guests mingled and music drifted through the room, I slipped away to the balcony. The city lights shimmered below and the summer air was warm on my skin. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a story that had finally found its ending. I thought about my mom still baking in her small kitchen, her laughter soft and sure. I thought about Eden, who had found a job in another city, sending occasional emails that sounded lighter each time. And I thought about my dad, who would never see this night, but had finally learned to live with his own truth. Laurent joined me on the balcony. The wind lifted his hair slightly. He said, "Funny how life circles back to the same places." "Maybe it's not a circle," I said. "Maybe it's a spiral. You come back, but you're never the same." He smiled. "I like that." We stood there in silence, the city alive beneath us. After the gala, life didn't suddenly become perfect. The world still carried its noise, its cruelty, its small betrayals. But I had learned how to live in it without breaking. I had learned that revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. One evening in July, I sat by the river, the same spot where I used to stand when everything felt unbearable. The sun was setting, turning the water to gold. A child threw a stick into the current and laughed as it drifted away. I smiled without meaning to. The world kept moving, and for once I was moving with it. Later that night, as I packed up my bag, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eden. It just said thank you. I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "For what?" "For everything," she replied. I set the phone down, my heart full in a way I couldn't explain. That night as I fell asleep, I dreamed not of Christmas dinners or boardrooms or scandals. I dreamed of sunlight, of open fields of laughter that didn't hide anything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between bills and junk mail. At first I didn't notice it. It was plain, no return address, just my name written in sharp, deliberate handwriting that made my stomach twist before I even opened it. I stood by the kitchen counter, sunlight spilling over the marble, my hands trembling slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a single page. The words were simple, but they hit like a storm. "I'm being transferred. I wanted you to know. Take care of yourself, Dad." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It had been months since I last saw him. Months since our uneasy peace had settled into silence. Now, the finality of that short message made something tighten deep in my chest. I folded the letter and stared out the window at the gray skyline. The world outside looked the same, but mine shifted again quietly, without warning. I spent the rest of that morning trying to focus on work at the Foundation. The office was busier than ever. Calls came in nonstop, new cases, new crises, new stories of betrayal and courage. I should have felt fulfilled. Instead, I felt hollow. Laurent noticed it right away. During a meeting, he leaned toward me and said softly, "You're somewhere else today." I forced a smile. "Just tired." He didn't press. But later, when everyone had left, he appeared by my office door. He had that look, half concern, half understanding. "Do you want to talk about it?" I hesitated, then told him about the letter. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he said, "Maybe you should go." "Where do you go?" "See him, before he's moved." I shook my head. "I don't think it would change anything." "Maybe not," he said, "but it might change you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the city outside my window. His voice echoed in my head. "Maybe it might change you." I thought about the years I'd spent running from my dad's shadow, about how many times I'd said I didn't care. But the truth was, I still did. That was the part that hurt most. By morning, I had made up my mind. I called the prison to confirm the transfer. They told me it would happen in 3 days. I booked a flight that afternoon. The next day, I flew to Illinois, the state where he'd been serving his sentence. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke as I drove from the airport. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, but my hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. The prison sat on the edge of a small town, surrounded by farmland and barbed wire. When I checked in, the guard looked at my ID, then at me. "You got 20 minutes, he said. I walked through the familiar corridors, the same gray walls, the same hum of fluorescent lights. My heart pounded harder with each step. When I entered the visitation room, he was already there, sitting on the other side of the glass. He looked older again. The lines on his face had deepened his hair more gray than before. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up with something fragile, something like relief. I sat down. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said, "You came." I nodded. "You wrote." He smiled faintly. "I didn't think you would, neither did I." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "They're moving me to a different facility. Minimum security. I guess they think I'm not a threat anymore." I tried to smile. Maybe that's a good thing. "Maybe." His gaze softened. "You've changed. So have you." He shook his head slowly. "Not enough." For a while we just sat there, the silence thick between us. Then he said, "I've had a lot of time to think. About what I did. About what I thought mattered." I leaned back slightly. "And what did you figure out? That I confused power for love, control for protection? I thought I was building something for all of us, but I was really just building it for myself." I looked at him for a long time. It was the first time I had ever heard him say anything close to an apology. He continued, "I used to think weakness was the worst thing a man could show. Now I see that cruelty was worse. I was cruel to you, Rayan. I see that now." My throat tightened. I wanted to hate him, to hold on to it, but something inside me cracked instead. He said, "I don't expect forgiveness." I just wanted to say it while I still could. For the first time in years, I let myself cry in front of him. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet tears that felt like they'd been waiting a lifetime to fall. When the guard came to end the visit, my dad stood slowly. He pressed his hand against the glass, hesitant. I hesitated too, then lifted my hand to match his. The glass between us was cold, but in that moment, it felt like something had finally warmed. Afterward, I drove until the road disappeared into open fields. I pulled over and sat in the car, the silence pressing around me. I thought about the man he had been, the man he was now, and the space between those two versions. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for him to come home, believing that if she just tried harder, he'd notice her. It took me a long time to understand that his love had never been the kind I needed, but now for the first time I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. When I returned to Chicago, the foundation was in chaos. A high-profile case had exploded in the media. A whistleblower named Morgan had leaked evidence about a pharmaceutical company falsifying clinical data. The company had retaliated, suing her for defamation. Our phones wouldn't stop ringing. I jumped into the work immediately. Meetings, statements, crisis management. For days I barely slept. But somewhere between the exhaustion and the adrenaline, I realized something. This was what purpose felt like. It wasn't clean or easy, but it was real. One evening after a long day of meetings, I sat alone in the office. The city outside the window pulsed with life. Laurent walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You haven't gone home in 2 days, he said. I smiled faintly. "Someone has to keep the lights on." He handed me a cup. "You remind me of me when I started." "That's not a compliment." He laughed. "No, it isn't." He sat across from me. "You know, I think your dad would have been proud of this." I looked at him sharply. "Don't say that." He held my gaze. "Not proud of what you did to him, proud of what you became." I looked away, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "I don't know if I believe that." "Maybe not yet," he said, "but someday you might." A week later, Morgan's case turned into a national story. We stood beside her during the press conference, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. When it was over, she turned to me and whispered, "How do you stay calm through all of this?" I said. "You stop trying to stay calm, you just keep standing." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." That night I walked home alone. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I stopped by the river again, the same place where I used to come when everything felt unbearable. The water moved slow, dark, reflecting the city lights. I thought about my dad's letter, about his voice, about the strange peace I felt when I left him. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about letting go of the weight. The next morning I received another letter, this one from my mom. She had moved back to her hometown, opened a small bakery, and was happier than she'd been in years. She wrote, "I wish your dad could see what you've built. Maybe someday you'll both find peace." I folded the letter carefully and placed it on my desk. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I felt grounded in it. Every wound, every betrayal, every act of revenge had led me here to something that mattered. Later that week, Laurent called me into his office. He smiled as I walked in. "We've been approved for federal funding," he said. "The foundation is going national." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious?" He nodded. You made this happen. I felt my throat tighten again. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind in the quiet office. I looked around at the stacks of files, the empty coffee mugs, the framed photo of the first women we'd helped. I thought about how much had changed, about how much I had changed. Outside, the city lights flickered one by one. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a train passing. For a moment, I closed my eyes and listened. I thought of my dad sitting somewhere far away, carving wood with those same hands that once built empires. I thought of what he said. I confused power for love. Now I understand. Power without love destroys, but love without courage does nothing at all. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool night. The air smelled of rain again, clean and sharp, like something new was beginning. The morning the news broke, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and the sound of the wind pushing through the trees. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. When I glanced at the screen, I froze. The headline read, "Former CEO Gerald Kane passes away in prison at 61. I didn't move for a long time. The cup cooled in my hands, and the birds kept singing as if nothing had changed. It was strange how life didn't pause for grief. It just went on quietly, relentlessly. I thought I was ready for this moment. I wasn't. The article was short. Cardiac arrest, early morning. He had been found alone in his cell, no foul play suspected. I read it 3 times before setting the phone down. Then I leaned back and stared at the open sky. There was no rush of emotion, no tears, just a stillness that settled deep in my chest, the kind that comes when a story finally ends. Later that morning, I called my mom. She already knew. Her voice was steady. I thought I'd feel something more, she said. Me too, I admitted. Maybe we ran out of feelings for him a long time ago. Maybe. There was a pause, and then she said softly, "Do you want to go to the funeral? I don't know. You should. Closure isn't for the dead, it's for the living." The funeral was held 3 days later in a small chapel outside Chicago. Only a handful of people attended. No cameras, no reporters. Just silence, and the faint hum of an organ playing a song no one seemed to recognize. Vivienne was there, dressed in black, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Eden sat beside her, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When I walked in, a few heads turned, but no one said anything. I sat in the back. The air smelled of lilies and old wood. The priest spoke briefly about forgiveness and redemption, about the man my dad might have been beneath his ambition. I listened, but my mind drifted. I thought of that Christmas dinner, of the laughter, the sting of his words, and Laurent's voice cutting through the room. "That's my daughter." I thought of the glass between us during our last conversation, the way his hand had pressed against it. When the service ended, Vivienne approached me. Her perfume was sharp and familiar. She looked thinner, older. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "He talked about you a lot." I raised an eyebrow. "In the last months. He said you were right." I didn't know what to say to that. She continued, "He wasn't a good man, Rayon, but he did love you in his way." I looked at her. In his way cost too much. She nodded slowly as if she couldn't disagree. Then she turned and walked away. Eden came up next. Her eyes were red but dry. We just stood there for a moment before she said, "It feels strange, doesn't it? Like the air's too quiet now?" "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "I know I was awful to you." "We both were," I replied. She gave a small, broken smile. "I want to do better. So do I." She nodded, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was brief, awkward, but real. After the funeral, I didn't go home right away. I drove to the old house on Hawthorne Lane, the one we'd grown up in. It was empty now, sold months ago, but I parked across the street and just looked at it. The red shutters, the oak tree still standing in the yard, the faint shadow of curtains in the upstairs window. I thought about the girl who used to stare out from that window, dreaming of escape. I thought about the woman she became standing here now, free in ways she never imagined. That night, I sat by the river again. The water reflected the city lights, calm and endless. I took a deep breath and said it out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. "Goodbye, Dad." The wind picked up, carrying the word away. The next morning, I returned to the foundation. Life was moving forward. Morgan's case had gone to court, and the media had latched onto it as a symbol of integrity in modern business. The Mercer Truth Initiative was expanding into 3 new states. We were hiring staff, opening new offices, building something that mattered. Laurent was already planning a conference for the fall. He greeted me at the door. "You okay?" I nodded. "He's gone." He exhaled softly. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "Don't be. It feels clean, like an ending that finally knows how to end." He studied me for a moment, then said, "You've changed." I smiled faintly. Again, always. That's the point. That evening, after everyone had left, I walked through the empty halls of the foundation. The walls were covered with framed letters from the people we had helped. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for fighting when no one else would. Each one was a story, a reminder that even in the ruins of betrayal, something good could grow. I stopped by my office window and watched the city. The skyline glowed gold against the dusk, the same skyline that had once made me feel so small. Now it felt like a promise. In the weeks that followed, things began to settle into a new rhythm. Eden visited once, bringing homemade cookies and a hesitant smile. She had started volunteering at a youth shelter, helping young girls find jobs and safety. I was proud of her in a way I hadn't expected to be. Mom called often her laughter lighter now. The bakery was thriving. She'd even started dating again. The past no longer hung between us like a shadow. One afternoon, I received a package at the foundation. No return address again, but this time I knew the handwriting immediately. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, polished smooth. On the lid, a single word was etched: freedom. I opened it. Inside was a folded note. It was from my dad, dated weeks before his death. Rayan, I know you may never forgive me, but I need you to know this. You were never the mistake. You were the proof I could have been better. If I'd understood that sooner, maybe things would have been different. Build something good, for both of us. My eyes blurred as I read the words. For a long time, I just sat there holding the box, feeling something I couldn't name. Not grief, not forgiveness. Something deeper. That evening, Laurent found me sitting on the steps outside the building. He asked if I was okay. I handed him the note. He read it silently, then gave it back. What are you going to do with it? He asked. Keep it, I said. Not because I need to remember him, but because I need to remember that people can change even if it's too late. He nodded. That's as close to peace as anyone gets. A few weeks later, the foundation hosted its second annual gala. This time, I was the one giving the speech. The hall was filled with faces, some familiar, some new, all gathered because they believed in something larger than fear. I stood at the podium, hands steady, voice clear. There was a time when I thought revenge was the only way to reclaim what was taken from me, but I learned that revenge alone leaves you empty. Justice rebuilds. Truth heals. What we do here isn't just about exposing lies. It's about giving people their voices back. It's about proving that silence never wins. The crowd applauded, a soft wave that filled the room. I looked at them and felt a warmth spread through my chest. For the first time, I felt whole. After the event, Laurent raised his glass. To Rayan, he said, the silent revenger who found her voice. Everyone laughed, and I joined them. That night, when the music faded and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked over the city. Everything glittered alive and endless. I thought about all that had happened, all that had been lost and rebuilt. I whispered quietly, "Thank you." To no one, to everyone, to the universe itself. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked older, stronger, and peaceful. Sometimes I wonder if people ever truly get what they deserve, or if life just gives us chances to become who we were meant to be all along. I don't know the answer, but I know this justice isn't loud. It's patient. It's quiet. It's choosing to stand when you could sit, to build when you could burn, to forgive when you could hate. And maybe that's what being alive really means. If you've listened this far, tell me what justice means to you. Was there ever a moment when you had to choose between anger and peace? I'd love to know. Like, share, or comment if you believe that silence can be the loudest revenge of all.